Hello, dear friends. Today we will read the memoirs of Hauptsturmführer Eberhard Hader from the 5th SS Division Viking. This is about the battle for the city of Kovel in 1944. At the beginning of March, the Red Army launched a new offensive in the right bank Ukraine against the German forces of Army Group South. Exhausted and hardly combat-ready by this time, the Waffen SS Division Viking was ordered to defend the city of Kovel. Now, let's turn to his memoirs. After we broke through from the encirclement in Cherkasy, where we rescued only our lives and all heavy weapons and machine guns were gone, the SS Division Viking, or to be more precise, its combat-ready remnants, was moved to the area of Lublin-Holm to take a break there and reorganize into a panzer division. On December 31, 1943, the division numbered 14,647 men. After battles and encirclement by February 25, 1944, only 4,000 men without vehicles and heavy weapons reached the line held by German forces in the area of Zvenigorodka. The casualties were catastrophic. Under these circumstances, on March 12, 1944, an order was sent from the Führer's headquarters to dispatch a combat group of 4,000 men to reinforce the garrison of Kovel. The reports that the division's strength was poor and lacking in regular equipment made no difference to this order. The soldiers were immediately loaded onto vehicles and departed. I was not among this group, as I was sent to a reserve battalion with the order to build up an auxiliary company. Still, I know well the events that unfolded in Kovel. On March 18th, with the first orderly officer, the division commander, Waffen SS Gruppenführer Hille, left for Kovel to replace the commandant there, Obergruppenführer Bach-Zalewski, and take command. In Holm, both SS Panzer Grenadier regiments, the 9th Deutschland and the 10th Westland, were loaded, among others, with full equipment, with machine guns, handguns, and ammunition. They fit into just 2 echelons and headed in the direction of Kovel. But in Kovel, people waited in vain for their arrival. The train with the regiment Deutschland came under a heavy bombardment and could not keep moving. It first had to fight back the railroad line. The regiment Westland also had to fight immediately from its wheels. However, they did not succeed in getting through to Kovel, even the next day. Having only light weapons, they could not beat the enemy. There were already 4 Soviet rifle divisions around the city, backed by tanks. In addition, there were some powerful partisan units that had been operating in the area for a long time. The Soviets were not eager to actively attack Kovel, but instead cut the railroad line again and again and fiercely fought back against efforts to lift the blockade. It was in line with Hitler's basic belief, which obviously strengthened with the duration of the war, that the enemy's offensive should be stopped by the defense of fortified points and not by a war of maneuver. So it was in the winter of 1941-42, and even at that point it became clear that this was a very serious mistake in the command of the troops, which had increasingly grave consequences over time. After Manstein's resignation, there was no more discussion of maneuver warfare. Instead, it was changed to holding positions with the stubbornness of a donkey. Then, the awful idea of fortified places was born, which were supposed to be used to stop the advance of the Red Army. In accordance with Hitler's order on March 8, 1944, their garrisons should let themselves be surrounded in order to gather large forces and set the stage for a successful counteroffensive. Thus, the High Command designated the city of Kovel as a fortified place, and the Commander-in-Chief of Army Group South, Field Marshal Manstein, appointed Waffen SS Lieutenant General Hille as its commandant on March 16, 1944. The city of Kovel is located in the north of Volhynia and is surrounded by swamps. As it was, and still probably is, an important transportation hub, it was therefore of considerable military and operational significance. The new commandant could not describe the situation with the defense of the city as reliable. The garrison strength was 4,000 men. There were only police and security units, which were usually used exclusively against partisans for the defense of the fortified place, besides 4 sapper companies, a light artillery division, 1 light anti-aircraft division, and an SS cavalry regiment with Balkan Volksdeutsch volunteers. There were also 250 men from the rear units, who had until now served very comfortably in the rear support companies, the field commandant's office, and on the railroad. And all of a sudden, these men turned unexpectedly into combat soldiers. Immediately, and with great vigor, Hille took measures to improve the defense. All units were given their combat tasks. The field fortifications and barriers were constructed. The supply roads were taken under protection. The commander of the Viking Division forces intended to deblock Kovel became the commander of the 5th SS Artillery Regiment Richter. The divisional battle group consisted of artillerymen, anti-aircraft gunners, and sappers who had neither vehicles nor field kitchens nor radios yet. Their echelon was unable to go further than Lubomel. It could be possible for them to go into battle only as infantry, because all the appropriate armament that they should have had was completely non-existent at this point. That is why they were assigned to guard the railroad line going to Kovel. It was blown up again and again by partisans and attacked by Soviet assault aircraft. To reinforce our forces, the just-formed 3rd Panzer Battalion of the Deutschland Regiment also arrived, and it was our only combat-ready unit at the time. The division headquarters were located in Lublin, and from there it controlled the manpower, supplies, weapons, vehicles, equipment, and railroad transportation. This required the exertion of all forces. The Soviets, by converging attacks, tightened the encirclement ring and pushed the defenders to the outskirts of the city. They managed the first breakthroughs of the defense line. On March 19th, the 42nd Army Corps from Holm launched an operation to deblock the fortified place. The deblocking forces reached the crucial village of Matsivo, located about 25 kilometers west of Kovel. This made it possible to unload the newly arrived 131st Infantry Division right at the station in Matsivo. The leadership of the wedge point directed along the railroad was taken over by its commander, General Weber. Meanwhile, the state of affairs in the encircled city was getting worse and worse. The losses were growing, but it was impossible to accelerate the operation to unblock the city because it was not possible to hasten the transportation of people and resources. The railroad line from Holm to Kovel was blown up again and again and no longer operated. The second supply line, a washed-out country road, became jammed with standing vehicles and was totally paralyzed. Finally, the 434th Grenadier Regiment, commanded by Colonel Neber, went to the attack to the east, and after heavy fighting, took Steyr Koscheri. It was supported by the 3rd Deutschland Battalion, reinforced by a battery of the 190th Assault Artillery Brigade. The battalion was equipped with armored personnel carriers, but regrettably had not received any training and practice on them. Moreover, the mobility capabilities in forests and swamps appeared to be very limited. Under such conditions, this combat vehicle did not find its use. The offensive stopped. We lacked support with heavy weapons, which we were able to use very limited. Our own forces were too weak. On the deeply exposed flanks of the narrow advancing wedge of the 131st Infantry Division, the Soviets were launching intense counterattacks. From the north, they were beaten back by the remnants of the 1st and 2nd Battalions of the Deutschland Regiment under the command of Sturmbannführer Dorr. From the south, the Westland Regiment of Obersturmführer Massel, together with the 5th SS Anti-Aircraft Division of Sturmbannführer Steuge, provided cover. But these troops, too, had only handheld weapons. Under the increasing pressure of the enemy, it was conceivable that the deblocking forces advancing on Kovel along the railroad line would in turn also be surrounded. The terrain condition around the city made it impossible to conduct tank operations, but support of the infantry by armored vehicles made a difference. In addition, the newly formed 2nd Battalion of the 5th SS Panzer Regiment considerably increased the braking power of the unblocking units. It had just been moved to Holm from France in a great hurry. The 8th Company was the first to enter the battle. On March 27th, it reached Matsivo and was under the 131st Infantry Division. For another breakthrough attempt along the railroad line from Holm to Kovel on March 29th at Steyr Koscheri were assembled, on the right, the 3rd Battalion of Deutschland, in the center, the 8th Company of the 5th SS Panzer Regiment under the command of Obersturmführer Nicolosi Lesk, and on the left, a battalion of the 434th Grenadier Regiment under the command of Captain Bolm. Both infantry battalions were reinforced with assault guns. At midday the offensive began, the first target of which was the village of Cherkassy. In 2.5 hours, the Panzer Company had already broken through the enemy positions in front of this village. During a heavy snowstorm, the Grenadiers took the village. 11 guns of 7.62 centimeter caliber alone were destroyed in it. That shows the strength with which the Soviets defended themselves. The order to stop the offensive did not reach the Panzer Company. It had already entered Cherkassy and occupied the defenses there. Nicolusilisk chose to build on the success and advance further. About 4 a.m. the next day, he attacked the Russians with 9 remaining tanks with his own forces. He was supported by Captain Bulm's Grenadier Battalion. After a few enemy tanks were knocked down, it was possible to break through the last barriers of the Soviets. At 8:15, the courageous commander of the 8th Company of the 5th SS Panzer Regiment, with 7 tanks, marched into the city and reported to its commandant. The defenders of Kovel got long-awaited and crucial reinforcements, but the blockade of the fortified place did not come to an end with this breakthrough. To the contrary, the ring of encirclement became even stronger. In order to protect our tanks that were hit during the attack and were unable to move, the 11th Company of the 3rd Battalion of the Deutschland Panzer Grenadier Regiments was assigned. Under cover of darkness, it reached along the railroad embankment to the station of Cherkasy. There, the crews of 2 Panthers that had been blown up on mines, together with 12 brave infantrymen, held the defense against the aggressively attacking Russians. This, now reinforced defensive point served for 2 more days. When the ammunition ran out, the fight became senseless. The company commander, Hauptsturmführer Troiker, received orders to break through to Kovel. But instead, he attempted to break through to the west on the night of April 1st to April 2nd. In this attempt, the 11th Panzer Grenadier Company of the Deutschland Regiment was totally destroyed. Its commander was among the many casualties. Since March 27th, the 42nd Army Corps, including the 5th SS Panzer Division Viking, 131st Infantry Division, units of the 19th Hungarian Light Division, and Hilles Group, was subordinated to the Second Army. This meant that the deblocking assaults would continue with new forces that were not available in the 4th Panzer Army. Thus, the 56th Panzer Corps, under the command of General of Infantry Holzbach, advancing from Brest to Kovel, was engaged in this operation. Originally, its goal was to deal a heavy blow to the Soviets and restore connection with the northern wing of Army Group South. With the events that had taken place, its main objective became the lifting of the blockade of Kovel. His attempts to cross the Pripyat River were met with worthy resistance from the enemy. Both advancing divisions on the left flank stopped. That is why the command of the 56th Panzer Corps no longer believed that Holzbach would be able to come to the aid of the defenders of Kovel in time. In the meantime, the situation in the city became so complicated that Army Group Center, in coordination with the High Command, ordered the city garrison to empty the fortified place and make its way westward. Hille expected that the deblocking forces, after the breakthrough Panzer Company's success, would use the same route to break through the ring of the Soviet blockade. This fact became known through decryptions of his radio conversations. But due to intense enemy attacks from the south and north on the exposed flanks of the narrow deblocking wedge, the 42nd Army Corps was no more capable of doing so. Furthermore, the village of Cherkasy, taken on March 29th, had been lost. It was retaken by a counterattack of a Jaeger Ski battalion. For this purpose, it required the support of the 7th Company of the 5th SS Panzer Regiment. Only 2 operational Panthers remained in the company after this battle. 6 Panther tanks were stuck in the swamp. The breakthroughs of the defensive ring of Kovel intensified, which could not be neutralized by counterattacks because the forces needed for that were absent. The encirclement ring kept tightening. There were not enough anti-tank guns, and the enemy tanks that broke through had to be destroyed in close combat. The soldiers who had never seen the battle and had never seen enemy tanks before had to do it. The report of March 31st stated that from the 4,000 men who were initially available, there were already 1,130. Based on these figures, we can get an understanding of the ferocity of the fighting and the situation of the wounded in the encirclement. The city's garrison was supplied only by air. The Luftwaffe air squadrons did this task in an exemplary and sacrificial manner. With bravery and considerable skill, in spite of heavy anti-aircraft fire, the planes were dropping supply containers. The cargo gliders were also landing. It can be easily understood that the great needs for supplies during the intense fighting were not satisfied in this way. More and more frequent reports of lack of artillery and tank shells were reported. The 2nd Army Command's order for the breakthrough to Kovel required an offensive with its main force on the right flank of the 56th Panzer Corps, the cutting edge of which should have been the 4th Panzer Division. It took longer than planned to get the division to the place of the offensive due to bad roads and bandits' activity. For this reason, the beginning of the offensive was postponed for one day. The 42nd Army Corps was supposed to march in the same direction to the east, at the same time protecting its southern flank. The Corps got reinforcements consisting of 2 Jägerski battalions, a storm battalion of the 2nd Army Command, a light artillery division, and a heavy anti-tank gun division. When, on April 3rd, all preparations for the final attack were completed, the forces of the 2nd Army were in full combat readiness. The surrounded Hille Group was already in a critical condition. On this day, the command of the 8th Army Corps replaced the command of the 42nd Army Corps and took his defensive section. It was already accepted as early as March 31st, and the impression may be formed that the operations in Kovel were judged by the command to be inadequately energetic. In this regard, it is necessary to mention the advice of the Chief of Staff of Army Group Center to the commander of the 2nd Army. He suggested appointing the commander of the intended offensive with the following veiled statement. If possible, it should be one of the regimental commanders of the 5th SS Panzer Division Wiking. The shelling by the Stukas helped the forces of the 131st Infantry Division take the dominant forest terrain to the southeast and east of Koszary. But it was not enough to defeat the enemy and take their positions. The Panzer Grenadiers of the 2nd Battalion of the Westland Regiment and the 3rd Battalion of the Deutschland Regiment were only to be content with taking important heights. The Russians defended solidly in these prearranged positions, with plenty of anti-tank gunnery. Not a thing could be done about them, and even tanks and assault guns were powerless. Meanwhile, the 4th Panzer Division under the command of General von Zauken moved forward slowly but surely. The division, overcoming the strong resistance of the Russians, was moving through the village of Moshnaya, about 7.5 kilometers northwest of Kovel, to the village of Dubovoye. It was supported at the beginning of the offensive by the 2nd Battalion of the 5th SS Panzer Regiment with the 6th and 7th Companies. Along with the division on the strategic right flank was the battle group of the Deutschland Regiment under the command of Sturmbannführer Dorr. Near the railroad from Kovel to Brest-Litovsk, the 5th Panzer Division ran into tenacious resistance again from enemy forces in equipped field positions with a strong anti-tank defense. The 5th Panzer Division advancing from the north also reached its objective. During the night of April 5th, the deblockade operation of the surrounded Hilles Group was continued. Under the darkness, Dorr's battle group reached the northwestern outskirts of Kovel, escaping the contact with the enemy. The 12th Panzer Grenadier Regiment of the 4th Panzer Division launched an attack on Dubovoye at daybreak and took it with the assistance of the 7th Company of the 5th SS Panzer Regiment. At the same time, the enemy's strong anti-tank defenses and artillery were overwhelmed. The attacking group then turned south for a final strike on Kovel. In the meantime, the 6th Company of the 5th SS Panzer Regiment marched from the village of Moshnaya. The 6th Company advanced in the southeastern direction, blocked the road to Dubovoye, destroyed an enemy battery, and reached the northern outskirts of Kovel, where it took up a position facing east and north. In this way, it covered and backed up the attacking group of the 4th Panzer Division, which had broken through the Soviet encirclement ring. Meanwhile, its back was covered by the 5th Panzer Division. In the afternoon, the main objective was achieved. The blockade of the fortified place was broken through. The next day, it was reported in the Wehrmacht Bulletin. The garrison of the city of Kovel, which had been surrounded since March 17th under the command of SS Gruppenführer and Waffen SS Lieutenant General Hille, with incomparable bravery, withstood a several-week assault by considerably superior enemy forces. The Army and Waffen SS units under the command of Colonel General Weiss and Infantry Generals Hossbach and Mattenklot, after several days of heavy offensive operations in the swamps of Pripyat, in extreme difficult terrain, broke through the enemy ring around Kovel and liberated their comrades from the encirclement. According to the 56th Panzer Corps' estimate, they were facing 7 Soviet divisions on their flank. To a large extent, success was ensured by the efforts of the Luftwaffe, who were really effective. Not the least of their efforts were the bombing strikes of dive bombers of the 1st Air Division, which cleared the way for the heavy fighting of the attacking group. A significant role in the successful conduct of the fighting in Kovel was played by the indispensable aides to the Commandant, Lieutenant Colonel Reinpel, who acted as General Staff Officer, and Hauptsturmführer Kaufmann, the Viking Division's orderly officer. Right from the moment the road was opened, the transportation of the wounded and the bringing in of supplies began from the besieged city. During the blockade, The 55th Air Regiment, which made about 250 stories, carried out the hardest supply task. The Viking Division, on paper deemed a Panzer Division, turned out to be the only unit that in March 1944, at the moment of highest danger, could be put into action against the Soviets, who had pushed forward between Army Groups South and Center. After the heavy battles in the cauldron near Cherkasy, and the breakthrough with unbearable casualties and loss of all weapons, it was beyond its strength to engage in immediate combat. The impression of total overwhelming defeat and the feeling of complete helplessness and powerlessness during the breakthrough was weighing heavily on the soldiers. They had to go into battle with the enemy again in the direst conditions instead of the eagerly desired and deserved leave in their homeland. The division was initially less than even the partisan groups in terms of weapons available. Having no well-organized command and supply, without its commander and its headquarters, the Division Viking was obliged to hand over its formations under someone else's leadership. That's why its units achieved no great success in the battles to deblock Kovel, except for the 2nd Battalion of the 5th SS Panzer Regiment, which significantly influenced the success of the whole operation. Nevertheless, the soldiers of the Viking Division demonstrated soldierly valor and became a support for their comrades even in the most severe situations and in the highest danger. Shortly after the fighting in Kovel, the Viking Division, in conjunction with the 56th Panzer Corps, the Hille Group, and the 8th Army Corps, was given the mission of establishing a new front line along the Turia River and integrating it into the 2nd Army's defensive front. The efforts of the Hille Group were focused on the task of creating conditions for the reliable defense of vital transportation hubs. The reinforcements arrived, including the 1st Division of the 5th SS Artillery Regiment and the 5th SS Engineer Battalion. The reserve included the 2nd Panther Battalion of the 5th SS Panzer Regiment. The units of the divisions were used for support of the 4th Panzer Division fighting north of Kovel, where the 6th Company demonstrated its strength, as well as for support of the 8th Army Corps advancing in the south. The melting snow season made it difficult to carry out large operations. In the mud, even tracked vehicles got stuck. A significant improvement in the situation in Kovel occurred on April 17th. With a cutting night attack, the Deutschland Regiment seized the dominant heights southwest of town, with Sturmbannführer Hask, commander of the 3rd Battalion, particularly honored. One company moved into the town. With help of 2 companies equipped with Panther tanks, it succeeded in knocking out the enemy from its southwestern outskirts. 10 days later, one tank battle group, under the command of the headquarters of the 5th SS Panzer Regiment, formed by the 2nd Battalion and reinforcement units, backed up the offensive of the 8th Army Corps on the front near the Turia River. The tanks of the Viking Division succeeded in making this Operation Isle successful in spite of the impassable terrain. It was even mentioned in the Wehrmacht bulletin. At the same time, the enemy units, which were from the area west of Kovel, with stubborn resistance so long, fought back all the attempts of deblocking offensive from the west along the railroad line from Holm, were destroyed. In May, the battle for Kovel ended for the Viking Division. Its units were withdrawn from the front. During the next weeks, we had a completely different mission to accomplish. We were to complete our reorganization into a Panzer Division and get ready to execute combat missions in a new capacity. For this purpose, we were given a large replenishment of men. We got new equipment and weapons, trained, and held military exercises. Their significance for combat operations the 5th SS Panzer Division Viking supposed to prove very soon, as early as the summer of 1944, having justified the expensive rearmament. That was the moment of the catastrophic collapse of Army Group Center. That is all for today. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like and support the channel by subscribing. Goodbye, and see you all again.